China has been keeping a massive database of millions of people around the world and ranked each person important or not important. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. For years, the Chinese Communist Party has been trying to infiltrate and influence countries around the world. U.S. officials have warned for years that China is stealing massive amounts of data in the West. And now we have proof of just how massive China's data harvesting is. A Chinese company called Zhenhua Data has been caught harvesting the personal information of millions of people around the world, allegedly on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party's intelligence services. Joining me today is one of the researchers responsible for uncovering this, Christopher Balding. You may remember him from a previous episode, How China is Going Broke and Taking the World with It. Christopher, thanks for joining me again.
Thanks for having me.
So everyone already kind of knew the Chinese Communist Party was spying on people in other countries. But the scope of the Zhenhua data leak blew everyone's mind. Can you give viewers an idea of how big this story is?
So basically, the original database covers about 2.4 million individuals, about 650,000 institutions, and tens of millions of additional data points from news stories to Twitter feeds to Facebook profiles, all kinds of information in there. But this was what we call raw data. It was just basically a text file. Mm-hmm. And to give you an idea, it was originally about a terabyte in size. So imagine a Word doc that is a terabyte in size, wow, just filled with information about people. That's the scope of what we're talking about here, and it is a lot of information about people and institutions.
What kind of people were they getting information on?
It was primarily what I would call influential people, and it was influential individuals from within a country that come from certain backgrounds. Mm-hmm. It might be a politician, it might be an organized crime figure, it might be a nuclear scientist, but it was definitely a collection of individuals and institutions that China considered important to track or influence.
Wait, politicians and criminal organized crime figures? Is there a difference?
I don't see much of one, but China might.
But that's really insane. That's a huge range of people.
Yes, absolutely. And you know, that's why, you know, as I try to explain to people, it's not just a random collection of individuals from a country. And it's not even a random collection of influential individuals. It is clearly a database designed with a purpose. It is targeting people with specific skill sets, specific backgrounds that China believes might be of use at some point in the future.
Do you know what that purpose is?
I do not know what that purpose is. I can tell you the database is clearly not a random collection, and so there's clearly some type of logic involved in building this database of individuals and institutions.
Mm. So many prominent figures around the world. Was I one of them?
So this database was actually very interesting in that it did not contain what I would consider, for instance, profiles of journalists or profiles of people that I would consider China watchers. And there were links to other databases. So you could quite possibly be in one of those databases, but we did not find data on journalists or China watchers really within this database.
So how did Zhenhua get this data?
So we're not entirely certain, for instance, whether they were given profiles of targets or whether they were, for instance, given a name list. So, maybe a client comes to them and says, here's a list of individuals we would like you to get data on, or whether a client came to them and said, these are the types of individuals we want you to get data on so we have a better understanding of the human terrain in an industry, in a country. So we're not entirely sure, but there's clearly a method to what is going on and the types of individuals and institutions that are appearing in the database.
Well, you mentioned a lot of the data was from like Facebook, so some of it at least was public sourced?
Yes, by our estimates, approximately 80 to 90% of it is open source. And so it will, for instance, if your name is in the database, it might collect from multiple different sources to build a full profile of you. And then there were, for instance, database generated fields that, for instance, might have scored you, might have classified you as important or unimportant, might have ranked you in different ways. And there were also room for analyst notes. So we absolutely saw analysts making notations about individuals or institutions.
And this was Zhenhua making these annotations and these ranks?
So we're not entirely certain if it was Zhenhua or an outside client. For instance, where we say with a high degree of certainty that the Ministry of State Security and the Chinese PLA were accessing this data. So we're not entirely sure if it was Zhenhua that was making these client notes, or that was making these notes within the databases.
But Zhenhua is tied to the Ministry of State Security and the People's Liberation Army?
That's correct, yes.
Well, so then this sounds really pretty scary that the Chinese Communist Party is essentially creating this database of, it sounds like people that they could essentially elite capture.
That does appear to be, it's almost like the list appears almost like that they're drawing up a target list, or that they want to understand the human terrain of, for instance, a sector, or they want to be able to track very easily what, for instance, institutions or individuals are saying about China.
So do you think that with this Zhenhua data leak, it's going to change how countries around the world view China and the Communist Party?
I think there is evidence that is all of a sudden it is waking people up, even if people might have suspected it. There are investigations beginning in a number of different countries that appear concerned over this data, and we're working with them to show them what the data is and everything like that. So I do think it is actually changing opinions of China and privacy concerns within a lot of these countries.
Yeah, but doesn't America spy on other countries and its own citizens?
So, for instance, in the United States, if the United States wants to spy on its own citizens, for instance, if you're the police force or something like that, there's actually within the IT systems there's something that's called a warrant management system, and they either have to. So, for instance, police force or the CIA has to receive a warrant. They have to show it to a Facebook, a Twitter, something like that, to get more advanced data. If it is public data, they could do a search, but they're not necessarily allowed to just keep data on American citizens. There's a very different type of information environment for how government actors can act within the United States. For monitoring foreign individuals, it's distinctly much more targeted than what we're seeing here.
Well, it's nothing new that the Chinese Communist Party is trying to get information on American citizens as well as citizens in other countries. There was the Office of Personnel Management hack. You have the issues of Chinese apps like TikTok, or even made in China games that you download onto your phone. What can Americans and countries around the world do to protect themselves from this kind of information gathering?
Where my mind has really changed as I've moved into this field of research is I have become a very strong believer in the need to increase data security and data privacy laws. Zhenhua had been doing this for quite some time, and basically nobody noticed. Because the data regulations that Facebook has to adhere to allowed this to happen. Facebook, I think, was quite honestly negligent in allowing this to happen, because the data standards, the data requirements on companies like Facebook are so lax that this goes on, and nobody would have noticed it if we hadn't discovered it. So I think that we need in democracies to stress, and we need to increase data security and data privacy laws so that this type of behavior does not happen with such regularity.
So kind of like a digital Iron Curtain?
I wouldn't necessarily say Iron Curtain. I would say something like, if somebody is storing data on you, we need to increase the difficulty to access that data. We need to have a much better idea of outside parties that collect data on us. We need to, for instance, as individuals, have much greater access that we as consumers control the data about us.
And out of curiosity, there's been a big debate about TikTok and whether or not it's, since it is owned by a Chinese company, ByteDance, if the data it collects on American citizens, if that goes to China. Did you find any TikTok data in the Zhenhua database?
Yes, there absolutely was TikTok data in the Zhenhua user database, and this just indicates that the problems that there are with TikTok data and their data management and data security issues, just as well as Facebook, to be honest.
Wow. So what can individuals do to protect themselves?
So, a lot of it, to be honest, is very basic type of things. Set your Facebook user profile to private. For myself, when I tweet, it's in full knowledge that that what I'm tweeting is very public information. That's why, for instance, there's no what I would consider private information about myself. I was stunned, for instance, to see how many people were putting on their user profiles that they had top secret clearance. To me, top secret clearance is not something that you should put on a social media platform of any kind. Another example is in your phone's camera settings, turn off the location. Because if you take a picture with your phone and put it on Twitter, if you haven't turned off the location settings, somebody watching that, and we know that Zhenhua did this a lot, they will be able to geolocate you where you are. And they did this for lots of military personnel, so that military personnel at very low levels that would take pictures of them and their buddies out drinking one night, they would upload that picture to Twitter or Facebook or something like that, and Zhenhua could locate U.S. military personnel geolocation to a very small geolocation window.
That's insane. And I really regret that Twitter thread I did of my biggest fears.
That is the kind of thing that they absolutely, I can guarantee you, are using to build profiles about you as an individual.
That's comforting. Thanks, Christopher. Always a pleasure having you on.
Hey, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Take care. And if you'd like to know more about the Zhenhua database leak, we did an hour-long interview with Christopher Balding on our podcast, China Unscripted. We do a podcast every week on a separate YouTube channel. I'll put the link to that episode below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Talk to you next time.